Greetings, it's the Forcetti. I have been making a lot of healer builds with subclassing, and I briefly want to explain my build philosophy as a whole for healers. So 95+% of my PvP is done in solo queue 8v8 Battlegrounds. So I build my healers to be as optimized as possible for solo queue 8v8 Battlegrounds. And my philosophy with healing is to have as much sustain as I possibly can without sacrificing the potency of my heals. So I want really strong heals with really high sustain. The overall goal there is to have as much overall healing output as I can and get as high a metal score as I can in healing, particularly in either Deathmatch or Chaos Ball game modes. I used to build fairly tanky healers, but I have noticed with subclassing, the burst is just so high that even if you try to build tanky, it doesn't really matter. You can build tanky, but you end up sacrificing so much that it doesn't really feel worth it to me. So I'd rather just sacrifice my tankiness and play better and position better and line of sight and things like that to optimize my survivability rather than building into tankiness and sacrificing sustain and or heal potency. So that's my general philosophy. The other thing is I don't generally have much mobility on my healers. That's the other thing I tend to sacrifice. So you have to learn how to predict situations basically and say, okay, this is about to be bad, so how do I predict the situation and get out of a bad situation before it even starts? And that's how I play my survivability on my builds. So my builds are not easy to play. I wouldn't say they're like beginner friendly, but they are very strong if you know how to get the most out of them. So with this build in particular, I always really liked the concept of building for max stat pools. I think it's something that's been lost a lot in ESO, unfortunately, but I was really motivated to say, okay, can I make a functional max mag Sorc that heals really well? And I think this build is something that does achieve that. And I think probably the most important set in this build was recommended by my friend Pepito, who said I should use 3 queens. And so the 5-piece here is gain 1 mag recovery for every 100 max Magicka you have. So right now we have 47,800 max Magicka. This is with 0 stacks and Death Dealer's feat. So if we max our stacks on Death Dealers, we have 50,400 max mag on our back bar in Battlegrounds. So that's with no champion points. So with 50,400 max mag, the effective recovery from this set is 504 Magicka recovery, but that is just base. So we're getting a flat 504. But we have a lot of other things to juice that number even more. So we are getting minor intellect from our healing contingency here, which is giving us an extra 15% recovery. We are also using spell power potions, which gives us an extra 30% mag recovery from major intellect. We also have Reviving Barrier, Inner Light, and Healing Contingency on our bar. What do those give us? So under Support, for Slotting Barrier, we get Magicka Aid for another 10% mag recovery. And then under Mage's Guild, we get an extra 2% mag recovery for each Mage's Guild ability slotted. So we have Healing Contingency and Inner Light, which both give us an extra 4% mag recovery overall. So if you add all of that up, on our back bar, we're getting 59% extra Magicka recovery. And so if you take that 504 base that we get from our 3 queen set when we're at max stacks on Death Dealer's feat, and you multiply that by 1.59 for the 59% bonus to mag recovery, the effective mag recovery when fully buffed on our back bar from this set in Battlegrounds is 801 mag recovery. The reason why this is so important is healers in PvP generally build their sustain around champion points and around getting their continuous attack buff, which is an extra 20% recovery. So we don't get champion points in Battlegrounds, and we have no way to get continuous attack buff in Battlegrounds. Because of that, we're always starved for sustain because heals at baseline are so expensive. So we have to do everything we can to get a lot of sustain wherever we can. And this set does that better than any other set if you're building into max mag. So originally I was trying Crafty Alfiq, and the difference between this set and Crafty Alfiq is huge. Now, when I was running Crafty Alfiq, I had the Atronach Mundus instead of the Mage Mundus. But even swapping out the Atronach Mundus to Mage and then putting this on, I gained a significant amount of recovery. I think I gained like 320 effective mag recovery when fully buffed, which is huge. So that's the pillar of our sustain, I would say. The other big sustain thing we have is channeled focus for sure. So we're getting 242 mag every 1 second, and recovery stats tick every 2 seconds. So this is really 484 effective mag recovery. I like to put mag return into recovery equivalents just so that everything's comparing apples to apples, basically. So 484 mag recovery from channeled focus is huge. Like, we need that. And then healing springs 10 stacks. Sorry, max stacks is 20 stacks. You're getting 300 extra recovery from this. And again, that would stack with our 59% extra bonus. So it would end up being more like 418-ish, if I'm doing that math right, recovery when fully buffed on our back bar. The one consideration for channeled focus is it's giving 242 mag every 1 second, but it doesn't scale with recoveries because it's not an actual mag recovery. It's just giving us Magicka back. So slight distinction there. So that's how we cover our sustain as best we can with this build, because the main goal of this build is to get our hots up. So we get our extended ritual, our healing springs, our leeching vines, our radiating regen. We keep our buffs up with healing contingency and blessing of restoration, and then we just spam Twilight Matriarch as often as possible. So this is definitely the cornerstone of this build. I will say that Twilight Matriarch is both the best heal in the game and the worst heal in the game in multiple ways. So it's the best heal in the game insofar as how it scales with your stats. So you can see that the tooltip on Twilight Matriarch here is 14,684 is the tooltip, and that's healing 2 targets at the same time. So that's crazy. Now let's compare that, okay? So we have 14684. If we put Honor the Dead on our bar, it's 14216. So even though this is only healing 1 target, and this is healing 2, the tooltip on this is bigger. And if you do the math on it, it's about 3% stronger than the tooltip on Honor the Dead. And if we compare it to Healing Soul, Healing Soul has the same tooltip as Honor the Dead, so 3% stronger than that. So compared to other spammable heals, Twilight Matriarch is 3% stronger, and it's healing 2 targets every time. So that's extremely strong. The other thing is, if you look at the cost, it's 2669 per cast. Now we do have triple reduced spell cost, and I am a Breton, so I get a lot of cost reduction stacking, which is part of, again, building into the sustain on this build. But if we compare Twilight Matriarch to the other heals, so again, 2669, if we compare that to Honor the Dead, 3663, so Honor the Dead is a lot more expensive. Now, Honor the Dead does refund a significant amount if you heal someone below 75%, which is going to be basically all the time that you're doing that. So it does gain a lot of sustain in that respect. But from a pure cost standpoint, Twilight Matriarch is significantly cheaper. And again, we can look at Healing Soul. Healing Soul would be 3663. And even if I have Druid's Resurgence, which is giving me 600 mag and stand back, this is still effectively 3063 Magicka per cast, which is, again, significantly more expensive than Twilight Matriarch. So that's the way in which Twilight Matriarch is the most OP heal in the game, particularly in the context of like BG's metal score spamming and stuff like that. The ways in which it's the worst is you have to double bar it, which is a very significant cost. The other thing is it can be killed quite easily, and a lot of times I will like recast, say, Extended Ritual, but I'll also need to recast, say, Radiating Regen or something. And I'll recast Extended Ritual and then cast Twilight Matriarch before recasting another hot. Just because if I go like 2 or 3 GCDs without hitting Twilight Matriarch, it won't heal itself, because the only way it heals itself, or the main way it heals itself, is through casting the ability. And it will usually die, and then you have to like channel it to resummon it for 1.5 seconds, which in the heat of an intense fight in Battlegrounds is like an eternity. So we want to avoid having to resummon our Matriarch as much as possible. And if there's an enemy team that's good at focus targeting your Twilight Matriarch, it's going to be a huge hassle. So do everything you can to like only go 1 GCD, 2 at most maybe, before recasting Twilight Matriarch. You just got to spam it nonstop. And that's why you need so much sustain. The other consideration is that it just like flies off, and it's like, I play controller, so I don't have a good way of like controlling my pet and telling it where to go and what to do. And I've talked to people who play mouse and keyboard, and they say, yeah, it's still not very good. So if I could control it and just have it like sit back behind me out of the fight, that'd be good. But it will like fly into the face of enemies and try to zap them nonstop, which makes it very easy for the enemies to be like, oh, there's 8 people here, let's just kill this Matriarch. So yeah, it's pretty frustrating. And going back to it taking 2 bar slots, we have to sacrifice even more mobility than we normally would. So I usually would have Race Against Time as my extra spot here. But since I have to double bar this, I can't use Race Against Time there, right? So that's another cost. The other thing is sometimes the quote-unquote smart heal on the bird is very bad. Like I've had allies that are in front of me with like 10% health left, and I'm staring right at them and I'm spamming bird like 3 times, and it never heals them, and then they die. So that can be frustrating, for sure. But again, overall, despite all the frustrating aspects of the bird, it's the best heal like on pure stats in terms of heal potency and cost. And those are the 2 things that we're starved for in BGs. Our heals are not very strong by default, and we have very little sustain, right? So those are the biggest problems to solve. So that's the major stuff with this build. I ended up going Druids as the other 5-piece because I needed a way to get more health, and Druids was the most efficient way to do that while also getting good amounts of max mag. And again, I just like the concept of like builds that give max stats as a way to get your power on a character, because I think the game is overrun with like all these proc sets that play the game for you and stuff like that now. So if you can do things to avoid, proc sets and that sort of stuff, and just cast your skills to get your power, I much prefer that build philosophy personally. So yeah, Druids is great, and then we have One Piece Trainee for some more max health, and the result of combining those two is that it allows us to run Ghastly Eyeball, which is just, again, greeting more max mag and mag recovery. Really good. I do run the Mage, as I mentioned, but I do also want to point out that I have 2 Divines on this build, Hands and Waist. You probably only need... Honestly, you could run 0 Divines and just run all in pen. It would be better from like a min-max survivability standpoint, especially because this build is quite squishy to begin with. But I really wanted to make sure I'm hitting that 50k max mag mark. So I went with 2 Divines. I'm pretty sure I could drop this to 1 Divines and still have 50k max mag, but I've been fine with how the build plays with 2 Divines, so I'm just leaving it for now. We have all the champion points over here. That's good. Let's go through the skills real quick. So really I want to mention the passives. I think a lot of the skills are pretty straightforward. I think the biggest thing to know about on Restoring Light is Sacred Ground. So you just get constant Minor Mending for 8% healing done if you're standing in your extended ritual, which should be all the time. So you get just permanent Minor Mending, which is really strong. Really hard to pass up, and especially when you combine that with Mending, where if you have an ally at low health, you get a lot more healing. And allies will constantly be getting burst down to low health in this meta. So these two stack just super well together. In Green Balance, we have to take it for the Minor Toughness just to get to... the build has 30.4k max health fully buffed in Battlegrounds. I will not play a build that has less than 30k health. Just because even if the difference between 30k and 29.9k max health isn't... You're not going to notice it functionally. The enemy team, for whatever reason, seems to notice if your health is less than 30k a lot more often, and they're like, oh, easy target, let me focus them down. And since I am an easy target and I'm pretty squishy, I don't want to give them that excuse to focus me. So I just build to at least 30k health, and we need the Minor Toughness. So we got to run Green Balance. The other thing that is really good is Emerald... Nope, not Emerald Moss. Accelerated Growth. When we heal an ally under 40% health, we get Major Mending, which is very strong, and it lasts for 4 seconds, and there's no cooldown on this, so this can proc constantly. The easiest way to do this is with Leeching Vines. You just stick it on a target, especially if you have like an ally that's the most out front, like in the front of the battle, face to face with the enemy. If you throw Leeching Vines on them, this will insta-proc when they drop below 40% health, and all of a sudden you've got Major Mending for 4 seconds and you're getting tons of healing done. If they drop down below 40% health again, you get another proc, so you're constantly feeding into that Major Mending, which is very strong. I would say that Leeching Vines is probably your best flex spot on this build, so you can easily run Budding Siege, which is also very good. You could also drop both for Race Against Time if you wanted to do that, but I don't want to sacrifice the ability to get Major Mending. Now, it's true that you can get Major Mending from Essence Drain. You gain Major Mending for 4 seconds after a fully charged heavy attack, but I don't want to have to rely on that because heavy attacks take an eternity in the heat of combat. So I'd rather not rely on heavy attacks for Major Mending if I don't have to. And I much prefer the Accelerated Growth method, personally. But yeah, if you really feel like you need the mobility, Race Against Time in place of Leeching Vines would be the way to go, for sure. We get our Major Resolve through Channeled Focus. We get our Minor Resolve through Blessing of Restoration. So we keep those up. Fairly straightforward. The Inner Light is just giving us a ton of stuff. It's giving us 2% max mag and 2% mag recovery for slotting. It's also giving us another 5% max mag as the skill itself, which is huge. And Barrier is actually a very good cast on this build. So it's not just for the 10% mag recovery. This is like the only healing build I've ever had where I prefer casting Reviving Barrier over a strict healing ultimate like Life Giver. But usually I will end up casting Barrier on this build. If my Life Giver is like my, in case of emergency, cast this, someone's about to die, and I don't have enough ulti to cast a Barrier, or they're not close enough to me to get hit by my Barrier, I will use the resto ulti. And that's the biggest kind of niche to this build, I would say, compared to other builds. Usually you're just slotting this for the mag recovery. Here I'm actively using Barrier quite often. My Barrier, like, in BG's fully buffed, it's like a 23 to 24k Barrier, which is a very significant Barrier, and the heal over time on it is quite good as well. So it's just an extra hot for 15 seconds on top of the Barrier, because the Barrier can break. Even though it's big, it can break fairly quickly if the other team has good damage, but that extra hot for 15 seconds is far from nothing, I would say. So that's the general philosophy around the build. Again, you can see all the champion points and stuff here. They're not relevant for Battlegrounds, but those are decent champion points nonetheless if you would want to take this into Cyrodiil. I think Cyrodiil, this would not be a good Cyrodiil healer build, because generally you need to build a lot tankier for Cyrodiil, because you can't rely on keeping your team between you and the enemy nearly as often. The other thing that I always want to mention is I think there's a lot of people that will get into Battlegrounds and they will have an extremely one-sided match where like their team is very bad and the other team is extremely stacked, which happens way too often, and they'll just get destroyed. And they'll try to build their build around the fact that they got destroyed in a very one-sided game. But you can't ever make a build that will make a difference in that kind of a game. So there's no reason to try. And you don't want to get misled by changing a bunch of stuff to try to compensate for the fact that you had a really bad team and you got steamrolled. You want to wait until you have like a fairly even game and see how your build performs. And then if it doesn't do well, you could go from there. I do have literally the very first match that I played on this build after swapping to 3 queens was a death match, and I got 11.2k medal score with like 2.7 million heals. And I always try to tell people, especially in deathmatch, the way to frame your healing done is relative to the damage done by the top damaging players on the other team. So if you can out heal the highest damage player on the other team, you've canceled out their damage, and that's a good benchmark in a deathmatch for a healer. And I think deathmatch is the best game mode to benchmark your heals, because people tend to be stacked up. You tend to be able, and the goal of everybody is just to deal damage and or heal. So it's a good metric, I would say, compared to like flag games or capture the relic or something like that. Even Chaos Ball, there's a lot of added damage coming from the Chaos Ball. So you're getting a lot of extra heals that you wouldn't be getting otherwise. So you can't really judge the potency of your heals in Chaos Ball as well. And so yeah, my first game I had like 2.7 million heals, and it basically canceled out the top 2 enemy players healing. And so if you're canceling out the top 2 damage dealers on the other team with your heals, as long as your team has any amount of damage and is able to get some amount of kills, it should be a good game, and hopefully you'll end up winning. But if you don't win, you've certainly done your part to try to help your team win. So that's the build. Sorry I rambled about a lot of different things, but thanks for watching. If you got any questions, leave them in the comments. I'm happy to answer. Thank you.